All right, so this is a quick overview of how you're going to set up audio levels for podcasting. It's very basic. We just want to make sure that you understand how to set it up for success when you're doing podcasting. So when you first get here, I've already preset up the levels on the mic so you can hear me. But let's start with my mic and look at what you would do when you first start. Now, right now, it's always, when you come in here, it'll probably have the mics that are at the podcasting table are 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're muted, which is a good way to start out. I have already preset up my channel because I'm wearing a lav mic. And I want to make sure that my levels are good. So I'm going to hit select, and it's already on processing. Let's say you were on something else and that screen didn't show up. Just hit select and then processing. And then that's going to go to this screen. And then to get into your all of the things that you want to change for your specific channel you're working with. So sound is coming in to the inputs in the back, and then you're routing them to specific channels. So all the mics are linked up to specific channels here. So my sound, my lav mic is coming in on channel 5. So I want to adjust the gain. So right now it's pretty decent. When I go really loud, you see how this gets up into the yellow. That's okay if it happens every once in a while. But if it happens, like, I'm going to pull up the gain and you can start listening. You can hear that all of a sudden my voice got really loud. And if I were to do any louder laughs or something like that, it would peak. So I'm going to turn this down. And then let's say you're in a car listening to a podcast, and there's two people talking, and one person is about this volume, and then one person is about this volume. So you can barely hear that other person. And that's really related to the gain or the preamp. It's called both. I'm going to just call it gain because I think that is easier to think about. Gain is the amount of signal coming in to the board from the mic. And you want to make sure that your gain, this is probably the most important thing with sound for podcasting, is that your gain, whoever is talking, is regularly around the 0. Every once in a while when they get excited, if they go laugh or something like that, they can go up to like +10, but you really don't want to have it regularly up there. You want to have it right around 0, and you don't want to have it right around -10 or -20 regularly. That just means that you have, if you have it too low, like -10 or -20, that means that you don't have as much signal, as much input to actually affect, to do signals with, to affect the signal, to compress, to make changes to, and then ultimately it will either not sound very good if you've messed around to try to, fix it later, or it'll just be really low in comparison to the other mics that you have in the podcast. Or if it's just you, it'll just be really low, and it'll be like when you're sitting in the car listening to one person talk on a podcast, and you have to turn up the volume in your car really high to actually hear them, which is very annoying. And then your anything else can be really loud in your car, and that sounds bad. So you want to have good gain. That's your number one thing. So the way, I'm just going to repeat how to get into there, and then we're going to listen to, Drew's going to be reading something in a second, and we'll get into there. So one last thing, when you show up here, this is how the board will typically look when you show up. And it usually will be on processing. So when I hit select, it's in processing. So it's going to start giving me all these different options to process the signal on this specific channel, which is mic 5. So all I did was I went into the gain, and then I'm affecting the gain. So we're going to keep it at 39. That's pretty decent signal for my voice, related to the mic that I have on, the lav mic that I have. Okay, so let's go into bring in Drew. So let's say you've got somebody on mic. I've got Drew sitting in front of mic 2. So first of all, I'm gonna go out of, I'm gonna unselect mine, and then I'm going to go over to Drew's, and I'm gonna select his. I'm gonna unmute his. Now, before I pull up the fader, sometimes people pull up the fader right away. The fader is kind of the last in the chain, related to what you're pushing out of the board and what you're hearing. So first of all, I'm going to look at the gain here. So I'm here on the gain. Drew, do you want to go ahead and start reading?
Sure. It's midnight. There's a full moon. That is no moon.
Okay.
Whatever. Are you scared, Darth Vader?
So first what I'm doing, I'm going to kind of talk over him a little bit. I haven't pulled up his mic, so you can't actually hear him. You might hear a little bit of him in my lav mic, but go ahead and keep reading.
Okay.
I've got his fader turned down, so that means that in the mix that we're recording, you're not going to really hear him. But that is fine, because what I'm looking at right now is the gain. I want to make sure that when he's reading that I have enough signal coming in. So I'm going to pull up his. So as I turn this preamp gain knob, it's changing the amount of gain. It shows it in a few different spots. I'm looking at this. I'm not necessarily looking at this. This is the overall mix levels. So anytime I talk, you see that it's like, it's up there. But that is the overall mix. This is Drew specifically, since we're in channel 2, I've got it selected, and this all this information has to do with channel 2. So I am actually going to pull up his gain a little bit more. And it has to do with people's preference also. You can't just set it and say, oh, every one of the people in my podcast are going to have this amount of gain, because everybody has a comfort level of how close they are to the mic, and that affects the sort of the intensity that they're speaking into it. And some people have softer or louder voices. So you're always going to change the gain related to that. So let's listen to Drew together. So I'm pulling up Drew's voice in his fader in the sound that we're recording. So now go ahead and talk a little bit, Drew.
Okay. Well, this is just an old woman.
So
she's also a witch.
I'm still looking.
Are you scared?
I'm going to pull it down a little bit. So I'm still looking at his gain level right here, and he kind of went above 0 a bit. So I'm going to pull it down. Keep reading, Drew.
I'm already cursed.
I'm going to pull it down just a little bit, because I don't want it to be too hot.
It is fine.
Now there's a big difference.
You're breathing kind of hard.
Notice how as I
fine.
pull up, you can hear him more.
Are you afraid of spiders? No. Black cats? No. Public speaking?
Okay,
no.
I'm going to pull his down.
The dark?
But you notice how the gain meter over here remained the same, even though his
I will
volume
never be scared.
is up.
Who could possibly?
So there's two different things, and you can trick yourself up a little bit by this. There's 3 different things, really. There's the gain, there's the fader, and then there's the headphone volume. So let's say you're listening here at the board and you're listening to how everybody sounds. The headphone volume is connected to what's being recorded in left-right mix, and we'll talk about mixes later. But I like to keep the headphone volume pretty low, because I don't want to fool myself with having it up really loud and be like, oh, everybody sounds great. But then all of a sudden, their levels are really low. So what I'm listening to here, there's a volume of how loud my headphone mix is, and then there's the volume of what is being recorded in the left-right mix here. So go ahead and talk a little bit, Drew.
So you're not scared, Darth Vader? I am not scared. I will never be scared. Who could possibly scare Lord Vader? All right, kids. I guess that's it. You can take off your masks. Masks?
Okay, so I pulled down the gain on his a little bit, and also you can tell that if you can read a little bit more.
Yeah, stop.
Notice
that
how
is not a
loud he's
toy.
getting.
Stop it. Stop. They're only children. Are you scared, Darth Vader? Of course I'm not scared. Then you wouldn't mind if more children came to play. Oh, I am most displeased. I am most displeased. All right, enough. Make them go away. He's no fun. Let's go. Yes, those children are lucky they left.
Okay, so notice how the gain level it stayed around the same, but I changed the fader volume. So for you guys listening, Drew got really loud and then really soft, and now he's not talking. What you're seeing when I'm talking and Drew's not talking in this meter is because we're standing in the same room together, the mic is picking up my voice even though I'm not right there. So don't let that confuse you. It's just when Drew's talking, go ahead and talk for a quick sec.
But look, Darth Vader,
Yeah.
there is still one kid left.
Okay. So, and notice how Drew is, like I've been pulling down the gain a little bit, and sometimes it's still hot in how he's talking. So then we're going to go into the next thing. So let's say you've got your, what people call gain staging. Your first thing is adjusting the gain, and then you can pull in the fader, and then make sure that your headphone volume, just to listen to everything, is pretty low, because you can always turn that up and it'll be louder in your headphones. But that only has to do with the headphones that I'm listening to, has nothing to do with what we're sending out and recording. So when we're on the channel that we're trying to make effects changes to, then, so Drew's on mic 2. Drew's gonna go ahead, if you can go ahead and talk a little bit.
Of course.
I've got him a little bit low.
I will not allow it. What's
And
the
then, now the next thing in line is HPF, high pass filter.
You do not want to turn the page.
And
Well, I guess this kid has the power to trap you inside the book.
I guess we can hold off for 1 second.
Okay.
And I just want to explain that high pass filter, it's nice to know, don't confuse it, it's not confusing. It's basically, high pass filter allows anything high above it to pass through. So all you're doing with this is you're cutting out room noise. And keeping it, the default is right around 60. You know, you can go as high, so this is the button attached to it, and this in means that it's actually in. You can turn it off, meaning I don't want to use that at all, which is fine. If you are going to use it, I would only keep it, you know, up to like max 80-ish, because what you're wanting to do is take off the room sound, which is the low sort of sound that can be recorded in any room. So that's the high pass filter. You don't have to use it. You can use it, but if you use it, only have it up to around 80, because it's cutting off the hertz after that. And notice this has a slope right here, so it's actually starting to affect 100 hertz and below, but it's really starting to kick in around 72. So just remember, if you don't want to use it, just turn it off right here. And actually, this is a good example of how it is. So if I pull it up really high, since Drew, men usually have lower voices. So anybody that has a lower voice, if I turn this on and I pull it up really high, then it's going to start cutting off all of the low frequencies in that voice. So Drew, go ahead and read for a second, and if you can watch, I'm going to turn it on and off, and then you can hear the change of his voice with it on or off.
Wow, I guess this kid has the power to trap you inside the book. Almost like you're frozen in carbonite or whatever. Child, the power of the dark side compels you. Join me, together we can rule the galaxy. 1 page left. Now are you scared, Darth Vader? Of course I am. Ah, stop, do not turn the, no, blast. That's all I have.
Okay.
I came to the end of the book and start over.
Just start over again?
Yeah.
Okay, so notice how it pretty much cut off pretty much all of his voice when we were up really high. And then when I turned it on and off, as we came down, then you could hear that the richness in his voice came back. So you can really overdo this pretty fast. So it's nice to have it somewhere between 60 and 80 over here. Okay, now let's go on to the gate. I wouldn't do a ton with the gate. So the way that I know that it says the gate is right over here, and it's also this knob. So this is kind of the default setup. Think of a gate like open or closed. It's either allowing the sound signal through or it's not allowing it through. So people most commonly use gates when they have more than one microphone. And if you, like, let's say here we have 4 microphones that if I had them all unmuted, let's say we have 4 people sitting there, well, let's say one person is talking at a time, but all 4 of the microphones are picking up the silence or the room sound. And so collectively, when you mix those 4 microphones together, you have compounded room sound in there. You have more sound that you just don't need when the people are not using the microphones. So that's the most common way that people, most common situation to actually think about, oh, maybe I'll put a gate on it. You don't necessarily need a gate. This is only if you want to. This is the default of how the gate is. And basically the threshold of the gate is adjusted here. And all that is that's saying when you're going to allow sound through and cut off the sound. So at what volume, what dB level you're going to do it. So if you had the gate really high up here, somebody would have to talk really loudly to be able to let sound go through that mic. This is the default. It's at negative, 30-ish or negative 25. That's a pretty decent level. The only reason that I would use this or that I would adjust this, because I think this is decent. If you have 4 people talking, you want to just cut out whoever's not talking. It's essentially kind of turning off their mic. If you have one person that's very whispery and likes to kind of talk over other people, then I would turn their gate either off on that mic, or I would turn the threshold down so that they don't have to talk a whole lot, or they don't have to talk very loudly to have their mic turned back on again so that you can hear it. That would be the only reason to use it. But if you had somebody who was very whispery, your number one thing is you want to go back to the gain and make sure that their gain, the volume, the amount of input of audio signal is beefed up enough that that whispery person still is getting levels around 0. That's what you're wanting. So when you go back to here, you'd be like, oh, that person is really they're not talking very much. Then you would still want to get them back to around 0. Okay, so let's go. I don't think we need to demonstrate gate. Let's go into the parametric equalizer.
Cool.
So what's cool about this, so we're still on Drew's mic. When you go in, sometimes if you're not seeing live movement of sound signal here, see all that line and the little dots and stuff, then let's say this is the way that it is when you come in and you click on parametric equalizer and it just looks like this. You've got the different areas of frequency that you can affect, but Go ahead and talk for a second,
Sure.
Drew.
On May 6, 1859, during the Pikes Peak gold rush, John H. Gregory found a gold-bearing vein, the Gregory lode.
Awesome. Notice how you don't see, you see the input signal of Drew talking, but you're not seeing any real-time shape of the frequencies that are coming out when he's talking. So if this is how it looks, hit RTA so that you're now switching over, and then you want RTA on. And then I hit back to the, so I can get back to the parametric equalizer. Now go ahead and talk for a second, Drew.
Okay. In Gregory Gulch between Blackhawk and Central City, within 2 months, many other veins were discovered, including Bates.
Yeah, awesome. So, okay, and it's also picking up my voice as well, so that's why you're seeing it. But when, I think it sounds decent to me, but I'm just going to sort of demonstrate how I would, there's two different ways that I would make any adjustments to the EQ. So go ahead and talk, Drew, and I'm just going to, you can watch my hand and see where I'm affecting it. And it's these buttons over here.
Okay. By 1860, as many as 10,000 prospectors has flocked to the town, then known as Mountain City and surrounding prospects, but most soon left, many returning east. The 1900 census showed 3,114 people. The year 1863 brought the first attempt by hard rock miners to form a hard rock miners union. Of 125 miners signing a union resolution in Central City, about 50 broke windows and doors at the Bobtail mine, forcing other workers out. After a night of shooting and fighting, the union effort among Central City miners failed. Many Chinese immigrants lived in Central City during the early days, working the placer deposits of Gregory Gulch. They were forbidden to work in the underground mines, and most of them are believed to have returned to China after making their stake. The frontier gambler Poker Alice lived for a time in Central City and several other Colorado mining communities. Gold mining in Central City District decreased rapidly between 1900 and 1920 as the veins were exhausted. Mining revived in the early 1930s in response to the increase in the price of gold from $20 to $35 per ounce, but then virtually shut down during World War II when gold mining was declared non-essential to the war effort. The district was enlivened in 1950s by an effort to locate uranium deposits, but these proved unsuccessful. The population of Central City and its sister city Blackhawk fell to hundreds by the 1950s. Casino gambling was introduced to both towns in the 1990s, but had success in Blackhawk, which had 18 casinos, than Central City, which had 6.
Okay, great. Awesome. So you guys could hear how things changed, especially when I was in the low frequencies over here. If I went down really low, it really made Drew's voice sound, well, if I went down too low, it thinned it out a lot because you're basically pulling out low frequencies, which is the low tones of a voice. But I found that if I kept it up here, his voice sounded a little bit muddied, or if you added it, it can end up on the low end, it can make a voice sound really muddy. So let's say, you know, somebody's just sounding a little bit muddy in their voice. You can pull out a tiny bit of the low end and pull up a little bit of the high end. So I've got the frequency here and then the width. It's generally good to have a medium slope of width here. You don't want to have it, you rarely want to have it really tiny like this. You want to usually have a gradual thing. If you have it tiny, there's other reasons for doing that, and it's usually pulling out like a really bad frequency. But most people are going to sound pretty good on these mics, and so you're going to just typically always have your adjustments be very wide and broad, so they sound more natural. The other thing is you want to keep your adjustments typically, so once you find the frequency area that you are in, then you've got the gain where you're either adding more in that frequency or pulling out that frequency. And wherever you are, you want to stay between this range and this range. And I would actually even half that. I would say you want to be either -5 to -15. Because if you start really doing weird things like this, it can end up sounding terrible. You can always do lots more effects, and we'll talk about multi-tracking at the end and recording in a multi-track. But for this, I wouldn't do very much with the EQ when you're recording a podcast, because whatever you do here is saved to your tracks, and it's hard to undo it if you've changed it too much here. So the other thing that is a nice little default, if you're like, hey, this seems too complicated, I don't want to adjust, different parts of somebody's voice to make them sound better, you can just hit over here. When you're in the parametric equalizer, EQ, you can go hit library, and then DCM hasn't bought all of these presets, but you can scroll down and hit vocal, and then hit recall. And then that's gonna notice how that changed what I had on there before. And that can be a good baseline for people's voice. Or you can just have it be just straight across the board and not do any of this. The last thing, but probably the most important besides the gain, is compression. Sometimes, and if you noticed when Drew was talking earlier, with different parts of the kid's book that he was reading, his voice got louder and different parts got softer. And particularly when people are laughing, if you've got a good amount of input on your gain, and then all of a sudden they laugh, then it can peak the levels. It's just so much more input into that mic. So in that case, that's why it's good to keep it right around 0. And this is a different meter, so don't be confused. But if we go back here, you want to keep it right around 0 or a little bit under for the most of the time they're talking, so you have a little bit of headroom in case somebody laughs. So let's go back to over here. You hit peak, which actually refers to these two things, but it's basically, this is the compression. So this knob on the compression page affects the threshold. So there's a few different things that are nice to know about. With compression, when you adjust the threshold, it is the volume at which the sound is starting to be compressed. So the default was somewhere around 0. I like to pull it down a little bit. You don't want to compress it all the way down here, because it will sound really weird. But this is a good, 0 to -10 is a good place to have compression kick in. If you have somebody who, for whatever reason, they talk really soft and then they get really loud, and you just can't really get them to have a more equal volume, then you would add a little bit more compression to their mic, to basically try to not have them peak when you have the gain at a good level for most of the time when they're talking. So the things to think about are the threshold over here, which is controlled by this, or this is your all knob. So whatever you've got pressed on the screen is, you can control it with this. So from here, we'll talk about that. The compression ratio, 4:1 is a decent one. If you start getting up higher, that just means you're compressing the sound into a smaller space, and you can start to get what people call artifacts. That just means it starts to sound bad. But pop music, certain kinds of music, they have a certain sound that they use a lot more compression. But for podcasting, 4:1 is a good start off point, or less if you have people that don't have a huge volume change in their speech. And then, so we've talked about ratio, threshold. Gain over here is different than the gain over here. This is makeup gain. So let's say you you really put a ton of compression on one person's voice, and all of a sudden in the mix, when they were loud before, now they're softer. So you can click on gain and add a little makeup gain. I very rarely use the makeup gain. One thing that's important over here is really nice is the soft knee. So notice how when I have it off, you have these sharp lines. This is a graphic representation of how the sound is being affected. And when I have the soft knee on, notice how it's a softer curve. It's going to start affecting the sound earlier at a lower volume. And it's just, I think soft knee compression is much more natural sounding. So I would always have the soft knee on. I would have the ratio 4:1 or less. And then the threshold, I like to have it, -10. This one's at -13. I can click on this again and then adjust that. And then attack and release, you can leave as is unless it starts to sound really weird. Basically, you want to have attack is basically how quickly the compression starts to work on the sound, and release is how long it will stay compressed after the sound has stopped. So I would end up typically leaving it, somewhere around there. You can go, if you have a really fast attack, sometimes it can thin out the voice a little bit. So there's much more you can read up on it. But the other thing that I like to show too is that if you just want a basic preset for compression, when you're in the compression thing, you can hit library. And they don't have all of these, but you can just do RMS vocal and recall it. And that's like, that sounds one way. And if you're like, oh, I think this just doesn't sound very good, you can go back to library and then just do manual peak, and it'll reset it to kind of what it was before. So you can have the compression in or you can out. In means you're using the compression, out means you're not using it. So let's leave it in. Pan here, you pretty much always want to keep your signal in the center. If you're doing a mix with this board, then you might start using pan. But for recording purposes in a podcast, you're just going to keep everything in the center. All right, so let's listen to what, and one last thing about how I like to think of compression. If you've got a water hose, you've got the gain is the amount of water flowing through that hose. So you've got your tap that you're turning on, and the more you turn that water on, the more water that's running through the hose. So let's say you have two different sizes of hoses. One is a really tiny little hose in diameter, and the other is a fire hose. So let's say you've got your gain set at your faucet, you've got it turned all the way up. So in the really skinny diameter hose, it's going, it's pushing through there. It seems like you have a ton of water. But then if you put that same amount of input of water into the fire hose, it's just kind of dribbling through. So the amount of water that you have is the gain, but the size of the hose is the compression. So when you're affecting, when you want to get, another example is when you are in a car and there's a widely different, there's a wide range between the loud and the soft in somebody's voice. So most of the time they talk in the middle, but then they really get loud and you have to turn the volume down in your car because they're way too loud, or you're having to turn it up when they whisper a lot or something. Compression will push all of that. Basically, the size of the more compression you add, the smaller the size, the smaller the diameter of the hose for all of that input to be smushed together into. So that's one way of looking at it. I think the size of the hose, so you're just compression, you're making the diameter of the hose a little smaller. It's one sort of analogy. The other thing is if you've got soft and loud, you're basically pushing the soft and loud together a little bit so that you don't have such a wide range between soft and loud. If you overdo it, it reduces your dynamic range and it doesn't sound very natural. But that's the reason to use compression, is that sometimes people just speak really loudly, and you don't want to peak your meters and get up really, really high when somebody is talking really loud every once in a while, but most of the time they're in a decent range. So go ahead and talk a little bit, Drew, and I'm not going to talk, and then you can see how I adjust. I'm going to first adjust it to be really compressing a lot on his voice, and then I'm going to turn it in and out, on and off, sorry, so that you can hear what it sounds like with his voice compressed and then his voice uncompressed.
Okay. In 1877, the citizens of Central City formed the Gilpin County Opera House Association to fundraise for the state's first opera house. Denver architect Robert S. Rochelaub designed the Renaissance Revival stone and brick structure with a crescent-shaped balcony and arched windows. San Francisco artist John C. Massman painted a mural to the ceiling with a central medallion that features the sky, surrounded by a large geometrical pattern and trompe-l'oeil architect moldings. It was built by Welsh and Cornish miners and town residents who had a tradition of music. The opera house is kept cool during the summer by
And can you do some of it soft
Sure.
and some of it really loud?
Absolutely.
Or not crazy loud, but
Yeah, I know.
really loud.
The opera house is kept cool during the summer by creek flows that through a flume under the building. Electricity was installed in 1896, and it was renovated without structural changes in 1903. In 1929, a dedicated band of preservationists and music lovers formed the Central City Opera House Association to perform a renovation and to reopen the opera house. It was a volunteer-driven effort led by Ida Cruz McFarland, Edna Chappell, and Ann Evans that resulted in an extensive restoration of the
Okay.
Opera House in 1932.
And then you can keep reading.
Okay.
So I'm now gonna, I've set it a little bit extreme.
In the
12 to 1
1980s
is kind of
In
extreme.
1990s,
So I'm gonna turn it on and off.
The entire structure was restored, including the foundation and replacement of 1920 era lighting relic.
And talk maybe a little bit, just a little bit louder.
Okay. I'm going to go to productions and cinema then. With 1878 With the 1878 grand opening, Central City was Colorado's cultural capital, with another opera house, Tabor Grand Opera House, opened in 1881. The Opera House was not turning a profit, and it expanded its repertoire to include theater productions to increase its revenues. They featured prominent 19th century actors such as
Okay.
Joseph Jefferson.
Cool.
Cool.
So notice how in Drew's voice, he was, I think it's sometimes easier to hear when people get really loud. Notice how when I pressed the in button and took it off of that his voice got a lot louder. But when I had it in, it was compressed into, it was reduced, but basically compressed into a smaller space related to the low volume. So it didn't go up as high. Now, 12 to 1 is a really huge ratio. I would say most of the time you want to probably have it 4 to 1, something like that. All you're doing is gentle compression because the number one thing is going back to gain. You've got to gain stage correctly. When you go back to here, you want to make sure that his regular volume is right, is his regular speech, the input level is somewhere around 0. But let's go back to the compression. So 4 to 1's pretty decent. Threshold, I had it a little bit low. actually, sorry, with soft knee, that adjusts it a little bit. And I had the soft knee on, which makes it not sound as harsh. It's nice to have that. So you hit a threshold and then you can adjust it. But somewhere a little bit below 0 to -20 is somewhere around where I would affect. But you can play around with this a little bit. You can also use the library, and like we were talking about, you can just use a specific, like I just want to affect the peak in a gentle way, and then it'll go like that. If you want to go back and kind of reset it, manual, and then it goes to there. So that is compression. So the other thing that's really important to know, so we've talked about gain and faders and headphone volume, and then we've got, after the gain, we have the high pass filter, gate, compressor, and then all of the EQs over here. The last thing that's really important to know is related to the faders. So in most of your podcasts, the left, right, in all the podcasts, the left, right is what's being recorded to the TriCaster. So the levels, when you've got this button pressed, the faders that are up, and then the amount that they're up is the mix that is being recorded. So we demonstrated that earlier with Drew talking. This is a mix button, and all of these other blue buttons over here are for mixes. They're basically things that take the sound here and push them out. So they've preset this top one, it says speaker. That's for the tiny little speaker in the podcasting room. HP is for the headphones, and that's what Drew is listening to. Each headphone, each microphone has a headphone jack, and so when people are sitting in here and speaking into the microphone, they can hear themselves, and then they can also hear the callers that are coming in or the music or anything. So let's look at the, those are the main ones. There's other ones over here that you can adjust, but the essentially, so right now, whatever's lit up is what we're seeing here, the faders that are up. So is I pull down my voice, you're not going to hear me as well as you can hear me when I get back up to 0 or unity. Now let's go over to headphone mix. We adjusted this earlier. Actually, I'm going to jump back over to left, right. Then the main mix is always over here. That's the volume, that's the final volume of all of these faders going out is the master, or the main, some people call it main. Over here, so let's go jump to the headphone mix, the HP. So when I hit that, it lights up, and this is how we've got it adjusted from earlier. So I have Drew's, so since he's on the second mic, I've got his pulled down a little bit because he wants to hear himself, but you probably, when you're sitting there, you don't need it up all the way to hear. So I've got it at -10-ish. He asked to have my voice a little bit higher in his mix so he can hear it. There's only one mix, so it's not like each of the microphones. There's a way you can probably set this up, but how this is set up currently is that there's one mix of all the microphones going to the headphone mix. So let's say, in this case, if you had all 4 of these unmuted and you're using all 4 mics, then, maybe one person's a little bit louder than the other or something. Then it might be like this, or they might all be completely equal. And it's whatever is being heard there. So I'm going to put this back to how we had it. And then this is for caller 1 and caller 2. You can adjust it as you want. But that's essentially, you've got sound coming in to each channel individually. You select the channel. That gets you select the channel and hit processing. That gets you into all of these up here and the touch screen to be able to affect this specific channel, the sound, this mic that's coming in on this specific channel. If you don't have it selected, it goes back to this main screen. So if you show up and it's like this, hit a select button, and then that will get you into the processing for it. And you have to have processing hit as well. One other thing is if you are wanting to, so automatically when you are recording on the TriCaster, it's going to have a stereo mix, this mix of sound paired with the video. But if you want a multi-track recording that you can have each of these individual tracks recorded, that you can do sound effects, and you can affect the EQ a little bit more, you can put more compression on, you can add some reverb, you can do other processing things, then it's nice to be able to have a multi-track recording to do that. So the way to do that is you would do it at the very beginning, at least set it up before you record. So let's say you've got everybody's mic set and they're good. You go out of processing to the main screen, and then let's go ahead and put this USB in, and then I'm going to hit ins and outs, IO, inputs, outputs, IO, and then let's say you start on this page, you want to hit output, and then USB, and then right now it's automatically set up to be able to record all 4 of these mics. But today I'm on Drew's on channel 2 and I'm on channel 5. So right now we're not needing 1. So I'm going to hit that. It says unpatch. You say yes. And because you're in the USB output. So it's not sending mic 1 anymore, and it's not sending mic 3, and it's not sending mic 4 because I'm pressing on it. But I want to add in mic 5. So USB is up here, that will be on a separate track 5, and it's mic 5 is on separate track 5. Mic 2 is on separate track 2. Then I go over to utility and I hit USB utility. I want to format my USB. Don't have anything else on there because when it formats, it will erase anything else you have on your USB. Hit format. You want to proceed? Yes. Takes a second, and then it says ready. You go up to hit SQ drive. If this doesn't show up, you take out the USB, and you can put it right back in, and then it'll show up. But most of the time, it'll show up like that. So it'll take a second, and then it'll look like this. The other thing is you're going to look for here is that you have sound on both mic 2 and mic 5, meaning that it's now set up to record mic 2 and mic 5 because you see sound on it, but also you see mic 2 and mic 5 lit up, whereas these other channels, they're not lit up. Okay, so I'm going to hit record. So let's say you're all set and you're ready. It is always going to record your left-right mix. So make sure that your left-right mix is the way is the volume that you want of the different things in your podcast. And then I hit record, and it says it's waiting. And now I hit play, and then it takes a second, and then you see time elapsed 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5. So it's actually recording now, and then at the end of your podcast, or let's say you want to take a break or something like that. If you want to take a break, you can hit pause. Actually, I don't think it's going to let you hit pause. So if you want to take a break, you just hit stop. And then when you come back from your break, you hit record again and start. You might just consider, for ease of it, just letting it run the whole time and not stopping. But then when you're done with your podcast, hit stop. And then once it's actually back in this mode and it's stopped, you can take out the USB. You just don't want to take out the USB when it's still recording. So we'll go ahead and take that out. And that's under utility and IO again. One extra thing that I think is kind of cool to know about is this copy paste function. So let's say you've set up your left-right meters to be a certain way, and you haven't set up your headphones. Then you go back into left-right. This is how I want my headphones to also have the same amount of sound in each of these channels going to the headphones. So I'm going to hit copy here on the left, copy, hold that down, and then press left, right. So that's the mix I want to copy. And at the top, sometimes it'll say, let's see, let's try it again. If it'll say it. Yeah, so it says copy, and then I'm hitting left, right. So it says copied main left, right assignments. Now I'm going to hit paste. And then actually, just so we can see it change, I'm going to go to the headphone mix. Right now, everything's down. Now I'm going to hit paste, and then I'm pasting it to headphone mix. So now it's got the exact same settings that I had in left, right. The only thing that's different that is always manual is the main master. So let's say you shifted everything there, but it didn't affect the master, so you just have to pull up the master. The other thing that's nice about this is that if you spent all this time to get, the compression and, gate and high pass filter sounding good on one person's mic, and you're like, I want that to be the baseline for everybody else's mic, and then I'm just going to tweak it a little bit. What's nice is you can do the exact same copy-paste function with settings from one mic to another. So I'm going to go back to mic 2, and I'm going to jump into that specific, let's say I'm going to look at the compression. And actually, let me adjust it a little bit so that it looks, really, really different, infinity. So I'm really overdoing it on the compression. But let's say I really like what I did on channel 2, and I want it to copy it over to channel 3, but then adjust it a little bit from there, because everybody's voice is different. The only thing that won't copy and paste over is the gain, which is good. So I've got the gain here at 15. I'm going to go select onto mic 3, which is muted right now. It doesn't matter for this purposes. I'm going to keep it muted, but I'm going to turn the gain up, really high, so that we can see that, like, hey, there's 2 different channels here. If I've got these things I want to copy from channel 2, I'm going to hit copy, and then I'm going to hit select for channel 2. So notice how this says copy up here, and then copied processing mic 2. And then now I'm going to go to 3, and I'll do paste. So it says paste, and then hit the select button on mic 3, paste processing mic 3. So now it didn't affect the gain, but now I have this crazy compression that I did in mic 2 is now applied to mic 3. So that's a nice thing that you can jump, and you can have all your mics have the same starting point after you've done some correction on one mic. The only thing to remember, though, is now all of a sudden my gain is very different. That's the amount of audio signal coming into this channel from the mic. So I'm at 15 over on mic 2, but on mic 3, it's at 40, which is probably, I have it muted. Actually, I'm going to unmute it. Actually, we don't have anybody on there, so it's not going to matter. But it's just going to be 40 is really high, unless somebody's very, very quiet. So then you'd adjust that per each person that's sitting at the mics. And one last thing is, if you've changed things a whole lot, or you come in and things are all over the place on the board, and you just kind of want to reset it, you would hit scenes, and this is going to come up. Now we have a few different, 3 different ones for podcast. Just hit podcast 1 and hit go. And then it says, do you want to recall the scene?